Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order when you check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Sports Pictorium Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. If he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL helmet poster. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
Every once in a while, you stumble over a name of someone, a star of the past. Open up the books, do a little research, and then wonder why you had never heard of him before. Well, let me introduce you to one of those guys, a baseball Hall of Famer whom, I am quite sure, very few of you listening today have ever heard of. A guy who could hit for power, run, throw, and catch. A true five-tool player who had a career batting average of .321 and led the National League in stolen bases 4 out of 5 years. Next, on Sports Forgotten Heroes, may I present to you Kiki Cuyler.
This is Sports Forgotten Heroes, a tribute to the stars who shaped the games we love to watch and the games we love to play. Stars who provided us with many thrills, but when their time was up, they faded away. We'll take a look back at their spectacular careers, their moments of fame, even if it was just for one season or just one game. And now, here's your host, Warren Rogan.
Hello and welcome again to Sports Forgotten Heroes. Today, the story of a baseball Hall of Famer, Kiki Cuyler. And joining me in just a moment for a look back at Kiki's forgotten career will be Gregory Wolf, a co-director of the biography project for SABR, the Society for American Baseball Research. Wolf has written more than 150 biographies about baseball stars of the past. He's documented more than 100 games for SABR's Game Project, and he has also written and edited several books about baseball for SABR. Before we get to Kiki Cuyler, I just want to remind you that Sports Forgotten Heroes is sponsored by Audible. With Audible, you get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/sportsfh. Every week, I let all of you know about Audible. It really is a terrific way to get your reading in. And if you sign up for a 30-day free trial, you get a free download. And Audible sends Sports Forgotten Heroes a little something to keep this podcast going. I just finished up listening to Roger Kahn's great book about the Brooklyn Dodgers, The Boys of Summer. There's close to 200,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Give Audible a try free at www.audibletrial.com/sportsfh. Also, don't forget to follow Sports Forgotten Heroes on Twitter at SportsFHeroes. Search for our page on Facebook and get the latest news about Sports Forgotten Heroes on our site, sportsfh.com. So, who is Kiki Cuyler? Well, he broke into baseball with the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1921 at the age of 22, and then bounced up and down with the team's minor league affiliates until finally sticking for good in 1924 when he hit .354 and finished 8th in MVP voting. Over the next 10 years, only twice did Kiki fail to hit at least .300. But Cuyler found himself mixed in with a few weird issues, including something called the ABC affair, which ultimately led to his being traded away from Pittsburgh. He also suffered an injury, and that led to his being benched for a half year, which also played a role in his being traded away from the Pirates, and a few other items as well. Cuyler played with some of the game's most legendary names, including Pie Traynor, Rogers Hornsby, and the Wayner brothers, Big Poison and Little Poison. And while Cuyler was, without a doubt, one of the stars of the day and well known throughout the sport, his star faded away after he retired from the game. But ultimately, he was elected into baseball's Hall of Fame and joining Sports Forgotten Heroes now to talk about Kiki Cuyler is Gregory Wolf. Gregory, welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. I am so glad you could be here.
Well, Ward, I really appreciate the invitation. I look forward to talking to you.
Awesome. So let's start here. Let's start with this. It's a philosophical question. You take a look at the stats that Cuyler compiled over the course of his career, 18 seasons, a career batting average of .321. Twice, he led the league in runs scored, including 144 in 1925. He had 26 triples. 4 times he led the National League in stolen bases. And his defense, which of course is always overlooked, was as good as anyone. So how does a guy like this get overlooked for the Hall of Fame? Why does it take a guy who retired after the 1938 season 50 years to get elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame?
Well, Warren, that's a good question. And I think there are a number of reasons that it took so long. As you know, he was elected in 1968 by the Veterans Committee. And around that time, the Veterans Committee was really going back and looking closely at both dead ball era players as well as players who had played during the 1920s and 1930s. But let's take a look at Cuyler specifically. I really have a few reasons why it might have taken him so long, even though during his playing days as an active player, really between, let's say, 1924 and 1936, he was considered one of the best 5-tool players in baseball. I'll say number one of the first reasons, Cuyler was not necessarily the biggest name on his own team. First off, with the Pirates, as you mentioned, he establishes himself in 1924. The Pirates win the World Series in 1925. Again, they go to the World Series in 1927. But the Pirates in 1925 belonged to Max Carey, the Hall of Fame outfielder, center fielder. Pie Traynor was the third baseman. He was up and coming, a Hall of Famer as well. And those two players really defined the Pirates in the 1920s, and Pie Traynor the late 1920s and 1930s. Then we go to the Chicago Cubs. Cuyler is traded to the Chicago Cubs to begin the 1928 season. And over the course of his heyday with the Cubs between 1928 and 1934, the leaders of that team are Rogers Hornsby. He was acquired in 1929 and had his fabulous season in 1929. And Hack Wilson, who set the RBI mark in 1930. So even on the Cubs, he was an overlooked star on that team. So those are two big reasons. Number two, Cuyler lacks a lot of the markers that were readily associated with Hall of Fame players. Now, when I say markers, I talk about counting statistics. Now, Cuyler only played in about 1,850 games, 1,879. That's not a lot of games. Now, in 2018, that ranks 113th out of all of the Hall of Famers. So he did not play, quite honestly, in many games. He was injured a number of seasons, and so he has a career of some really outstanding seasons and then a few injuries, a few outstanding seasons and a few injuries. So he did not play a lot. He also only had about 7,200 at-bats. That itself is not many, especially when we're talking about dead ball and players from the 1920s and 1930s when these counting statistics played such a big role. And then finally, he did not have the counting statistics that Hall of Fame voters especially liked. Let's take, for example, home runs or RBIs.
Two of the biggest statistics.
Yes, exactly. Home runs, only about 128. RBIs, just over 1,000. Now, let's take into consideration other outfielders who also were elected in the 1960s by the Veterans Committee. I'll start off by Goose Gosling. He was a left fielder, Hall of Famer. He had a big counting statistic over 1,600 RBIs. Of course, he had won a World Series with the Washington Senators in 24, and later with the Browns in 1935. He was likewise elected in 1968 by the Veterans Committee to the Hall of Fame. And maybe one other Hall of Famer, also from the same era of Cuyler, and that is Heine Manush, player for Detroit and Washington. He had all the markers with RBIs and home runs. And so a number of reasons, markers, RBIs, and then he was never the biggest star on his own team, or at least not the person that was readily associated with that team.
Interesting. All right, we're going to get more into Kiki or Kai that way, and I did that because explain his name. For those of you listening, his name is spelled K-I-K-I as in Kiki, but it's not pronounced Kiki. Rather, it's pronounced Kai. How did he get that name? And explain the difference in how it's spelled from how it's pronounced.
Okay. Well, his given name is Hazen Shirley Cuyler. Hazen, his first name, and I'll mention that in contemporary press, both for Pittsburgh and in Chicago, and later when he played for Cincinnati, the newspapers, the Pittsburgh Press, the Post-Gazette, Chicago Tribune, they typically referred to him as Hazen Cuyler. So we have to really think that though today we call him Kai Cuyler, the press at the time used his given name Hazen more often than it didn't. So I think that's one thing that's overlooked today by writers and by fans of baseball. We readily think of him as Kai. That's not necessarily the case. His middle name is Shirley. That is the maiden name of his mother. Now, of course, that's an odd name too. Hazen is odd maybe to the contemporary ear, but it wasn't necessarily an incredibly uncommon name at the time that he was born. He was born in 1898. Anyway, his nickname, as you rightly said, Kai, probably the most mispronounced, or one of the most mispronounced nicknames that I can think of for any baseball player. There are two stories that come from this. One story is that during his minor league days, and he began minor league ball in 1920, his minor league days, that whenever he would hit an infield ball in order to distract his attention, or when he was at bat in order to distract his attention, opposing infielders would yell out Kai, the first syllable of his last name, as in Kai Cuyler. So that doesn't sound too far-fetched. That's an easy way to understand his nickname. So that's one. Another theory that goes out that has been widely disseminated is one that Cuyler was a stutterer, and his name might have been Kyle. He might have pronounced his name Cuyler with a stutter. So there are two possible reasons for his nickname. I'll say that he didn't use the nickname Kai. He used his given name Hazen typically.
Interesting. So, all right, we got that figured out. Now, tell me about his game. What kind of ball player was he, and how difficult was it for him to finally break through at the major league level? From what I read, I mean, he sort of languished in the minors for an extended period of time, although 4 or 5 years doesn't sound all that long. But from what I read, he was ready to come up to the majors long before he was called up.
Yeah, well, maybe a few things. First off, I'll say that Cuyler was considered really a prototypical five-tool player. He hit for average. He has a 321 career batting average. He had power. Now, keep in mind, this is the 1920s and early 1930s. He had power. He ran especially fast, led the National League in stolen bases 5 times, really until serious leg injuries robbed him of his speed. He was an incredible fielder in the outfield, and he threw the ball especially well, always ranked among the league leaders in assists. So he was a prototypical 5-tool player. Now, if we want to think about with whom he was compared while he played, maybe I'll say a few words to that. Number one, when he came up in 1924, he batted as a rookie .354. Then in his second season in 1925, when he led the Pirates to the World Series, he batted .357, which was second only to Rogers Hornsby of the St. Louis Cardinals. Cuyler's aggressive batting style was very often compared to Rogers Hornsby at that time. Now, as a fielder and as an overall player, he was very often compared to Shoeless Joe Jackson, Tris Speaker, and Ty Cobb.
Those are some pretty darn good names to be compared to.
I think, of course, maybe a listener today would think that I'm crazy to even say that. I'm not comparing him to those 3 players. I'm saying that who he's compared to. He was really considered that good coming up. No, obviously he didn't put the career together like Shoeless Joe, Tris Speaker, and Ty Cobb. But I will say just a few things so we really have a good understanding how good he was. Now, a long-time Chicago Cubs scout, Larry Doyle, who had signed a number of Chicago Cubs stars in the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. Jack Doyle is his name, Jack Doyle. Jack Doyle called Cuyler the most graceful player of all time. That's a direct quote from Jack Doyle.
Wow.
Jack Doyle furthermore said that Cuyler, and I'll quote, could do more things with a glove than Cobb. He could throw better than Cobb, and he could pick up ground balls on his outfield patrol like grounders. Now, that's quite high praise from a lifetime baseball scout, Jack Doyle. So he was really considered an exceptional 5-tool player. With whom might we compare Cuyler today? Well, maybe Kirby Puckett could be a comparable player. Craig Biggio, at least from the offensive side, might be a similar player. Now, of course, Biggio was an infielder, and Puckett and Cuyler was an outfielder. So that might be those might be some comparisons. Another one that might be a good comparison to Cuyler was Enos Slaughter. Of course, this great St. Louis Cardinals player from the 1940s and 1950s. But you asked also about Cuyler languishing in the minor leagues. Yeah. I don't know if I would characterize it as languishing in the minor leagues, quite honestly. Now, Cuyler did not begin playing minor league ball until 1920, and he was 21 years old at the time. He began playing semi-pro ball when he was only 14 years old. He grew up in northeastern Michigan on Lake Huron in a small town in a very sparsely populated area, and didn't begin playing minor league ball until 1920. He was signed by the Pirates at the end of the 1921 season. Now, the Detroit Tigers manager, Ty Cobb, wanted to sign Cuyler in 1921, but the Tigers owner, Frank Navin, had overruled Cobb at that time. And so the Pirates wound up signing him. And Cuyler had a look-see with the Pirates at the end of the season in 1921. However, that was a big jump for Cuyler. He was playing in a Class B league. Now we have to think a Class B league jumping all the way to the major leagues. That's like a Class A or a rookie ball jumping to the major leagues. That's almost impossible.
Wow.
So we can't really think about that. So that was just his first full season in minor league ball. He only played a half season in 1920, a full season in Class B in 1921. In 1922, he again played in Class B baseball, a full season there, batting around 300. Had another look-see at the end of the season in 1922. So that was just his second full season. And in 1923, his third full season in the minor leagues, he played for Nashville. The Nashville Vols in the Southern Association, and that was really his breakthrough season. He was the Southern Association's most valuable player. That was a Class A league. Now, keep in mind, there were no AAA teams back then. AAA didn't begin until 1946 when the minor leagues were reorganized. So Class B was the second highest league, and the Class A team, the Nashville Volunteers, were a good team. Cuyler was really the class of the league. He hit 340. He slugged over 500, and had a look-see to the Pirates again in 1923, and was back in spring training in 1924, where he made the team permanently. So I wouldn't really call it languishing. We have to think back in the 1920s. After all, there were only 16 major league teams. Playing in the minor leagues for 5 and 6 and 7, even 8 years wasn't out of the question. Cuyler was still young, 25 years old, when he caught on with the Pirates. I'll also mention that Cuyler played typically center field in the minor leagues. And who was the Bucs center fielder in the 1920s? Well, that was none other than Max Carey. Max Carey was a Hall of Famer. I don't need to remind you about that. He was a 10-time stolen base champion, in many ways considered among the finest center fielders of his day. I'll also mention that the Pirates outfielders in 1923 and 1924 were, in fact, quite good. You had Carson Bigby, who himself was a star at the time. He might be forgotten nowadays, but he was a star. He was a consistent 300 batter. He was hitting he had collected 200 hits. The other outfielder was Clyde Barnhart, who was an up-and-coming star. So the Pirates were loaded in the outfield. So we're talking about someone who had 2 full seasons in Class B baseball, a great year in Class A, but my gosh, breaking into an outfield, a trio of fly chasers who themselves were considered all stars and one Hall of Famer.
Maybe the term languish wasn't correct. Maybe I did confuse that a little bit with the fact that he got such a late start at 21. Just how important, when he finally did make it to the Pirates, how important was Kai to the team? How good were those Pirates teams?
Well, he was really he was a catalyst. You know, I'm always loath to compare players from different eras, despite modern sabermetric statistics. I enjoy baseball. I work closely with SABR, with the Society for American Baseball Research, for whom I serve as the co-director of a biography project, and have edited 10 books for SABR, and have written SABR biographies for maybe 150 players. But I'm reticent about comparing players from different eras. I will say that Cuyler was the key player on the 1925 squad. Now, when we think of a 5-tool player like Kai, with his incredible speed as a base stealer, well, we might think that today he would bat leadoff, quite honestly. He was a prototypical leadoff hitter. In 1925, he scored 144 runs, which was a then National League record, post-1900 National League record. He scored almost a run a game. Now, he was the catalyst for that team. He also batted third. I think that's a very important point. He really enjoyed batting third. Now, we think today that would be a strange position for someone like that, for someone like Cuyler to bat. He would bat first or second, quite honestly, today. But he batted third and was insistent his entire career that he bat third. Now,
why?
In 19, well, he didn't like batting leadoff. He didn't consider himself a leadoff hitter because he thought that he had power and did have power. He had 26 triples in 1925. Of course, he was playing in Forbes Field, spacious Forbes Field, and hit 18 home runs in 1920. That was a considerable amount. He did not like batting leadoff. And at that time, your number two hitter was really considered your bunter. He would be sacrificing. So at that time, the number two hitter was completely different than what we think of a number two hitter today. The number two hitter would sacrifice you over and lay a bunt down for the leadoff hitter to move from first to second or second to third. So that number two hitter was a different kind of position back during Cuyler's day. And he looked at himself as really a prototypical three hitter. In 1925, when the Pirates won the World Series, he was a catalyst. Had Rogers Hornsby not had his fabulous season in 1925, leading the NL in batting, Cuyler probably would have won the MVP. He was the runner-up for the MVP in 1925, and in the World Series in 1925, Cuyler simply had an outstanding, in many ways, career-defining World Series. That year, they played the Washington Senators. The Senators, still led by, at that point, the elderly
Walter Johnson.
Walter Johnson. Walter Johnson was on the tail end of his career. They had also gotten in Stan Coveleski for that season. They both won 20 games, and it was really a toss-up. The Senators were coming off a World Series championship in 24, and it was a toss-up. Now, the Pirates started off, they had home field advantage, and they played the first two games in Pittsburgh. And Cuyler, after the Senators won the first game, 4-1 behind Walter Johnson's excellent performance, many thought, well, the Senators might run the table. And, in fact, batting against Stan Coveleski, Kiki hit an eighth-inning home run. It was a 2-run eighth-inning home run to give the Pirates the lead and the victory. That was in many ways, complete turnaround for the World Series. So it moved to Washington in game 3, 4, and 5. The Senators won games 3 and game 4, putting the Pirates in a 3-1 hole, and the Pirates came back to win the next 3 games, the final 2 in Pittsburgh. And in many ways, Game 7 was considered an instant classic. I'm always reluctant to use a phrase like one of the greatest games in baseball history or World Series history. But I will say, if you read contemporary accounts from the New York Times, from national columnists from the New York Times, or from Pirates columnists from the Post, the press, it really was an amazing game. In that game, Walter Johnson started. He's starting his third game. He beat the Pirates in game 4 on a shutout. He's starting game 3, short rest, pitching 4 days later. So really only 3 full days of rest. And the weather conditions are terrible. It's rainy. It's cold. Walter Johnson doesn't have his best stuff. And Cuyler, what does he do? He hits in the late part of the game, in the 8th inning. The score is tied 7-7, and Cuyler hits a deep ball to right field. Now, this ball looked like it was a home run. Many people thought it was a home run, but in fact, it was considered a ground rule double. The ball was lost and got lodged in some kind of tarpaulin in the outfield. That was a ground rule double. Carson Bigby and Moore both scored. Eddie Moore and Carson Bigby scored to give the Pirates a nod. This was with 2 outs, mind you, 2 outs in the 8th inning. He hits this epic home run for the Pirates. Had it not been for Mazeroski's Game 7 home run to give the Pirates the World Series victory over the New York Yankees, one would say this is maybe the biggest home run in Pirates history. It won the World Series. And, of course, the Pirates come out. A little used reliever, Red Oldham, pitches a 1-2-3 inning, and the Pirates win the game and the World Series. 2 game-winning hits, a home run, and a ground rule double. It was remarkable.
That's great stuff, Gregory. And it brings me to this. I consider myself to be a fan of all sports, pretty knowledgeable. I don't know everything for sure. That's why I talk to guys like you. But the title of my podcast is Sports Forgotten Heroes. And as I research for different players to talk about from all the different sports, I'm going through the Baseball Hall of Fame, and I see Kiki Cuyler. And I'm going, geez, I am not familiar with Kiki at all. What about Pirates fans? Obviously, you're a Pirates fan, and when you look back at the history of the Pittsburgh Pirates, the names that immediately come to mind are guys like Clemente, you just said it, Mazeroski, Stargell, Parker, Paul Wainer. Do Pirate fans ever speak of Cuyler? Do they even know who he was?
Well, let me add Big Poison and Little Poison, the Wainer brothers, and Honus Wagner and Pie Traynor to that list too, and Max Carey and Arky Vaughan. Warren, I'll say that Pirates fans probably don't know who he is.
Interesting.
And I'll give you maybe a reason. Now, the reasons that I've given for why he might not be, a well-known player or might not be known that well in Pittsburgh or even here in Chicago, might be overlooked. These are just my suggestions. Maybe some other baseball historian has another idea. So after 1925, Cuyler, he is one of the biggest stars in baseball. We've looked at his statistics. He only plays for the Pirates for 2 more seasons, and both of these seasons were among the most controversial and strangest in Pirates history. And I think in many ways, these 2 seasons affected Cuyler's reputation in Pittsburgh, and at least his recognition in Pittsburgh. 1926 might be the most disappointing season in Pirates history. They brought back the entire team that won the World Series in 1925, and many thought that they would win the World Series again. They had an incredible pitching staff: Lee Meadows, Ray Kramer, Vic Aldridge, Johnny Morrison, Emil Edie. They had all these hitters on the team. Cuyler was just 26 years old, but the team playing for Bill McKechnie, a Hall of Fame manager and one of the greatest managers in baseball history for that matter, the Deacon. The 1926 Pirates were mired in a funk, and that funk soon evolved, or maybe better put, devolved, in a major controversy. And the controversy today is called the ABC controversy.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, the ABC affair.
I need to back up just a little bit and say that the owner of the Pirates was named Barney Dreyfuss. Barney Dreyfuss was a German-born industrial magnate and a very important and influential owner in National League history in the teens and in the 1920s. Now, Dreyfuss was also known, whether it's a well-deserved reputation or not, as a miserly owner who was very, I would say, stringent with his salaries. And that salary, his salary offers led to a lot of squabbles and quite honestly, problems with the Pirates. Even Honus Wagner, when he retired after the 1916 season, many said he retired because he rejected a contract offer from Dreyfuss when Dreyfuss was beginning what was then called salary retrenchment after the failure of the Federal League after the 1915 season, and salaries were being constricted. Now, Dreyfuss went out of the country in 1926, and during this time, a longtime Pirate player and well-known former manager, Fred Clark, who was in the Pirates front office at this time, began to sit in the Pirates dugout on the bench in street clothes. Now, players in the 1920s would not have played, in the mid-1920s anyway, would not have played with Fred Clark. As I said, he himself was a Hall of Famer and a longtime player-manager for the Pirates. Now, sitting in the dugout in a suit rubbed the Pirates, many Pirate players, the wrong way, and specifically 3 players. Babe Adams, who did play with Fred Clark. Babe Adams at that point was around 40 years old and a well-known pitcher in his own right. He was a star pitcher for the Pirates for a long time. That's A. B is for Carson Bigby. As I mentioned, he himself was a budding star at the time when Cuyler came up. And the third player was none other than Max Carey, who was on the tail end of his Hall of Fame career. Now you have 2 older players, Carey and Adams, who knew Clark well, and a somewhat middle-aged player as far as baseball years go, and that's Carson Bigby. They especially did not like this, and it devolved into a controversy where they confronted Clark, and it blew out of proportion. And what happened eventually was all 3 of these players were eventually either traded or put on waivers. This led to basically, and this was near the end of the season in August, and this led to practically open revolt among the Pirates players. McKechnie was said to have lost the team at this point, and the Pirates, considered the frontrunners to win the World Series in 1926, had a disappointing season. They finished in 3rd place. Yeah, of course, the St. Louis Cardinals won the pennant under player manager Rogers Hornsby in that season in 1926. It was a flabbergasting season.
And it had a long-lasting effect on Kai, did it not? Because the following season, I mean, well, was he temperamental? What kind of effect did the ABC affair have on Kai?
Well, Kai was having his normal season meaning that he was batting in his in the mid-300s. But in the late season, he slumped also badly and was batting well under 300. If I remember correctly, maybe in the 280s or so, 270s, over the 6 or 7 weeks of the season. Now, in my biography that I wrote of Cuyler for SABR, I uncovered some references in Pittsburgh newspapers that the sports writers at the time really attributed his late season slump, to the effects of the ABC affair. He was not necessarily one of the rabble-rousers in this affair, not at all. And he ended the season batting .320. He led the league at the National League again in runs with 113, and he led the league in stolen bases for the first time, the first of 4 times in the next 5 seasons. So in many ways, we could say that he had a great season. It wasn't as good as as his first 2 seasons, but he slumped at the end of the season. Now, you mentioned 1927.
Yeah, so what happened? So what happened in 1927, and did the ABC affair have an effect on a long-lasting effect on Kai because he only played in 85 games.
Yeah. Well, the ABC affair did not have a direct affair on Cuyler in 1927. Rather, the situation was something completely different. I'll start by saying that the manager, Bill McKechnie, was considered really a player's manager, one of the most beloved managers really in baseball history. A player's manager, not a disciplinarian. And many said he should have disciplined the ABC players, and he didn't, at least not to the way that many thought, at least Dreyfuss and Fred Clark thought he should have. So it was a foregone conclusion that McKechnie was out at the end of the 1926 season. He was replaced by Donnie Bush. Donnie Bush was a disciplinarian. This was replaced for the 1927 season. And one of the first things that Donnie Bush decided to do was, you can imagine it, he decided he is going to institute a much more disciplined group. Now, Cuyler, from all accounts, chafed under Donnie Bush's leadership, at least his leadership style. Now, why did they perhaps tangle right at the beginning of 1927? Well, early in the season, Cuyler suffers an injury. He tears ligaments in his ankle on a slide, and he misses 6 weeks. This is the first of really 4 serious injuries that plague Cuyler, 3 of which are leg injuries, which really by the mid-1930s rob Cuyler of his great speed. Now, so he comes back 6 weeks after tearing ligaments in his ankle. He comes back. What happens? He, in early August, gets into a controversy with Donnie Bush for his play, and he's fined when he doesn't slide into second base. Now, we could really take 2 different approaches here.
Sure.
We could say that, well, he was going to be out. He's trying to protect his ankle, and he was playing it safe. Well, Bush is an old school manager. Maybe Bush's approach was, it doesn't matter whether it looks like you're safe. Take out the fielder, slide aggressively. Old school dead ball player. Dead ball, grew up in the dead ball era, wanted that kind of play. That's not what happened. And in one of the most mysterious decisions in Pirates history, Cuyler, a catalyst for the team, was benched. And he wasn't just benched, he was benched for the rest of the season.
I read that. I can't believe that.
Now, it is remarkable to think that you have a player of Cuyler's potential, a leader of the team, who would literally be benched in early August for the remainder of the season. But that is, in fact, what happens.
And the World Series.
He's benched also for the World Series. Now, the Pirates win the pennant again. They're second in 3 years. Now, of course, they're going to face the murderer's row of the New York Yankees. And they're eventually swept 4-0 in what I might add was a more a more competitive World Series than many remember. It wasn't a complete dominant stomping of the Pirates by the Yankees. But Cuyler is benched for after this game, August 6th, benched for the remainder of the season. He only starts one more game the entire season, has about a dozen appearances, maybe not even that many, maybe around 10 appearances, and only starts one more game the rest of the season. Doesn't it all play in the World Series? It's astonishing. Now,
Gregory, you couldn't even get away with that today. There's just no way possible.
Now, imagine, pick a star player today, name your star player. They all go through, all players go through a situation where they might not run out a grounder to first. They might not run out, as an outfielder. They might not go as fast as a fly ball, but slide to second. I don't think anyone would be disciplined for that, quite honestly, today because of injuries. But imagine a player like, I'm reticent to say a player, but a star player for any team to be benched for the remainder of the season and then for the World Series. One of your best players and one of the best players in all of baseball. Let me just add that this is still a mystery in baseball, what the precise situation was. Now, there's a lot of conjecture. And of course, if you read the Pittsburgh newspapers, beginning August 7th through the remainder of the season, the World Series, and in the offseason, that was a big discussion. Cuyler's benching overshadowed the World Series in Pittsburgh. That was the number one discussion in the newspapers. Why was he benched? No, there was a lot of conjecture. Was it maybe a remnant of the ABC affair that Dreyfuss supported Donnie Bush's disciplining of a player of this magnitude? Was it an attempt to make sure that he established his discipline and control over the team? No one knows. I'll also say that Cuyler never publicly gave reasons for the benching during his playing days or, as far as I know, after his playing days, nor did Donnie Bush, nor did Dreyfuss.
To think that a guy like Kai could be benched like he was is just incredible. I mean, the guy was a hitting machine who could have possibly helped the Pirates win the 1927 World Series. But we'll never know. So just what kind of a hitter was he? Well, in addition to what Wolf has told us so far, here are a few other nuggets. In 1926, he hit .321, led the NL in runs scored with 113, and this is after he set a Pirates team record that still stands today with 144 runs scored in 1925. Led the NL in stolen bases with 35, and check out these numbers from 1926 too. He hit for the cycle against the Phillies in a 16-3 drubbing of Philadelphia. He belted 2 homers against Brooklyn and drove in a career-high 6 runs and scored 5 runs in a 21-5 shellacking of Brooklyn. And at one point, he had 10 consecutive hits and 14 hits in 16 at-bats. Also, going back to 1925, Cuyler set the Pirates record with 369 total bases and posted an OPS of 1.021. Yet, by not sliding into second base and the ABC affair, Cuyler found himself heading west to Chicago.
One more thing. There was some conjecture that this controversy in his benching, it really did damage Cuyler's reputation. It really did damage it. Now, he rehabilitated that reputation when he was traded to the Cubs in the offseason. But many around baseball were miffed by the benching, and with the rumor mill, of course, churned out by Dreyfuss or sports writers or even Donnie Bush. What you heard was, well, Cuyler is an egotistical player. He's only concerned about his own statistics. He's only concerned about his own health. He doesn't want to injure himself. So that kind of spin that the Pirates and some sports writers put on really affected his stock in the offseason.
It's really...
And he's traded to the offseason to the Chicago Cubs for Sparky Adams, a second baseman, and a very durable, good second baseman. But many thought this was a remarkable fleecing of the Pittsburgh Pirates by by the Chicago Cubs.
Now, before we get to the Cubs, I have one more thing I want to talk to you about with Kai and the Pirates. I read where he once hit 2 inside the park home runs in one game. One game. And it was in a really small park to top it all off, Baker Field in Philadelphia. Overall, he had something like 8 inside the park home runs in one season, 1925. So how fast was he? How good a base runner was he? And why was he able to hit so many inside the park home runs?
Of course, we think of what happened and hitting the home runs against the Phillies in Old Shibe. Well, that's difficult to think about, or why he hit the home run, why he hit the ground rule, the inside the park home runs. I mean, there could have been a situation that the ball took a strange bounce, the ball bounced off an outfielder, anything like that. But maybe a better way to approach this, at least for me, is how good of a base runner was Cuyler. Now, we already said that he was really considered one of the best base stealers during his early career. He was mentored by the best base stealer in the National League, Max Carey. As a rookie, he came up, he stole 32 bases as a rookie, then 41 his second year, led the league in 1926 with 35 stolen bases. He was really considered a prototypical base stealer. Now, not just a base stealer, but he was considered a daring base stealer. Now, anyone who looks at his statistics on baseballref.com or retro might also say, well, he hit a lot of triples as well. Maybe he was really fast. Well, number one, he was also fast, but he also played in Forbes Field, and we all know how big Forbes Field was, the outfield, center field, power alleys in center field. My gosh, they were over 450 feet.
Wow.
So he hit a lot of home runs. He was a daring base who never shied away from taking an extra base. So he really was a daring base runner. And I mentioned you mentioned his inside the poke home runs. I think I said shy, but of course that's Baker,
right.
The Baker Bowl. The Baker Bowl was really one of the smallest parks in baseball. I mean, if you look at the team, the Phillies as a team often batted 300. At the same time, they had ERAs over 5. So the Baker Bowl was a pillbox park. So, that's how I would approach Cuyler as a base runner. Simply daring, and I would say a daring base runner like Roberto Clemente as well. Roberto was not a base stealer, yet he was an aggressive base runner. I could say that Chris Bryant today for the Chicago Cubs is considered among the best base runners in baseball. He is not a base stealer, but he's an aggressive base runner. And that aggressive style from Cuyler could be seen on his runs scored. Of course, he played for some high-octane, offensively prodigious baseball teams, but he was simply an aggressive base runner.
So he leaves Pittsburgh and goes to Chicago. The Cubs manager, I think at the time, was Joe McCarthy, and he's ecstatic to have Kai on the Cubs and thought that with Kai, along with Rig Stevenson and Hack Wilson, they would form the best hitting outfield in the National League. But it wasn't to be. Kai got hurt in spring training. What happened? And even though we didn't miss any time, how did it affect his game, and how did it affect the Cubs' chance to win the pennant?
Well, I'll maybe think of 2 things of that season. And it was, in many ways, an unfortunate season for Cuyler. And you're right, he's traded to the Cubs in 1928. The Chicago Tribune called it an amazing steal for the Cubs, and conversely, the Pirates, the Pittsburgh Press called it a fleecing of their team. Now, in 1928, Cuyler injures his hand in an exhibition game in Kansas City. Fielding a ball, he runs into a wall facing a Kansas City Blues, a minor league team that's a double-A team. As I mentioned, there were no triple-A teams at that point. And he injures his hand, and that injury to his hand affects him the entire season. He crashes into this wall. He has a difficult time gripping the bat for the remainder of the season. And he only bats .285. He steals 37 bases, but he only bats .285. Now, I'll mention that was his age 29 season. So he's in his prime. In 1927, he's a year younger. He's 28 years old. In these two prime seasons, he only plays about 220 games. So he really loses a lot of time. He misses almost half the season in 27 with the benching. In 1928, he doesn't miss the season, but he's injured. He's injured. His hand is injured for the entire season. So that's unfortunate in 1928. But I think the key for the Cubs is the next year in 1929.
Yeah, let me ask you something, because in 27, the Yankees had their famous Murderer's Row. Didn't the Cubs label, or somebody labeled the 29 Cubs as having their own version of Murderer's Row?
Yes, they did. In fact, the Chicago newspapers called this a quartet of Cubs Murderer's Row. Of course, that moniker was used at the time, so it's probably not the best, but it was used. I think I also mentioned that in a biography. Let me just talk a little bit about that. This quartet of hurlers.
Sure.
The Cubs again have an amazing acquisition. They acquire Rogers Hornsby, the best hitter in the National League, but also one of the most volatile personalities. He wears out his welcome in Boston. He played for the Boston Braves in 1928. He only was there for one season, wore out his welcome after being in New York with the Giants for just one season. So in 1929, the Raja is playing for his fourth team in 4 years. Now, This was somebody who, by all accounts, was a teammate whom you did not want to cross, or probably, quite honestly, didn't necessarily want to talk to unless you were at the horse tracks. He was a noted horse fan of the horse races. In 1929, you have a quartet of hitters for the Cubs. Cuyler batting third, Hornsby bats fourth, Hack Wilson, whom they had acquired a few years earlier, is batting fifth, and Rig Stevenson, whom I might argue is the most unknown player in baseball history, who has a career .336 batting average.
How is that possible? I got to interrupt again. How is it possible that guys like that are forgotten and just not known?
Well, if I'm allowed a short digression about Rig Stevenson.
Yes.
Rig Stevenson might be considered one of the worst fielders of his generation. Now, he came up with the Indians in the early 1920s. He was a baseball star at the University of Alabama. He was a football star as well, a hard-nosed running back. And after just 5 seasons with Cleveland, batting .337, he was traded to a minor league team.
Because his fielding was that bad?
Because his fielding was so bad. They tried him out at many different positions. They came up as an infielder, second and third, then moved him to right field. He never found a position. And Tris Speaker, we know how good Tris Speaker was, Hall of Famer, my gosh, player manager, and then manager of the Indians, simply had enough and jettisoned a player who was batting career .337, incomprehensible today. Of course, he would simply be traded to an American League team, and he would bat .400.
Right.
But anyway, later he likewise he was 29 years old in 1927, his first season for the Cubs, and he put up batting averages 340, 360, 360. But he also suffered some very debilitating injuries. He himself only played in 1,300 games, so he had had some leftover injuries from his football career. He batted sixth. We could really say they might be, one of the greatest quartets in baseball history, at least in the National League, and definitely for the Chicago Cubs. Together, they batted well over 100 home runs. They knocked in over 500 runs, and they scored almost 500 runs. Now, the outfield consisted of center fielder Hack Wilson. I think it might be funny when we think of Hack Wilson as a center fielder. Hack Wilson was only around 5'6", weighed 200 pounds, and had his famous size 6 or size 6.5 shoe. But he was a center fielder, and of course his heirs in the 1929 World Series live on in infamy, at least in Chicago. Rick Stevenson, he was hidden away in left field, and Cuyler played right field. Cuyler could play all outfield positions, came up, as I mentioned, a center fielder, right field. He had an amazing arm. Maybe he felt more comfortable in right field, but I'm not sure. But he had amazing arm in right field. And he, again, later played center field after Wilson was traded. But that group of players, they were great. The Cubs, that was a fantastic team. The Cubs won the pennant in 1929. They ran away with the pennant, for that matter. They were up by double digits by mid-August, and simply were a fantastic team. Now they slumped near the end of the season. I'll say that they slumped near the end of the season, and played about 500 ball over their last 20 games. Now, why did they slump? Who knows? They were up, as I mentioned, by almost 15 games by the end of August, but they slumped over the last 20 games, and they limped into the World Series. Now, people often say, well, why didn't the Cubs win? Why didn't they win the World Series? No, they won pennants in 29 and 32, 35, 38, and again in 1945. They lost all five of those World Series. But let me just say, the Cubs simply were not the better team. And in 1929, as good as the Cubs were, and I always thought they might have been the most balanced Chicago team until the Cubs finally exercised World Series demons and won it all in 2016. They simply were outmatched against the New York against the Athletics, against the Philadelphia A's. Now the Philadelphia A's, well, that itself was a dynasty. Connie Mack's Philadelphia A's in 1929 and 1930 and 1931 were three of the best teams in baseball history. One could make an argument, and many have, and in SABR I know we like to make these kind of arguments, that the 1929 to 1931 Philadelphia A's were maybe three of the best consecutive teams in baseball history. Now, they won 104 games in 1929. They were 104 and 46. They were favored to win the World Series in 1929. And in fact, they did. I mean, that team was led by their own group of Hall of Famers, Cochran and Jimmy Fox and Al Simmons and Lefty Grove. George Earnshaw was a hoss at that time as a pitcher. I think he led the team in victories with 24. So that was a team, and they deserved to win. They won in 5. It might not have been a complete rollover like it appears today, 4 games to 1. Looks to a modern viewer that it was a rollover, but maybe just a few words about their World Series. Now, the Philadelphia A's won the first 2 games in Chicago. The first one was a famous game in World Series history anyway. Connie Mack, who was well known for playing his cards very close to his vest, had, as I mentioned, 20-game winners, Lefty Grove and George Earnshaw. Also, Rube Wahlberg, I believe he won 18 games that season, but he did not start any of those pitchers, together of whom won over 60 games.
Wow.
Instead, he has one of the great tricks up his sleeve in baseball, and he starts Howard Emke. Howard Emke, some say Emke, some say Emke. Emke is an American pronunciation. Emke comes from a family of German immigrants. Howard Emke himself was a very sturdy pitcher in the mid 1920s. He played for Detroit and Boston. He was a Submariner, and the Philadelphia A's had acquired him in 1929. He only made 8 starts all season.
But he had one big one in the postseason.
Mack starts him in the World Series, Game 1. Why? Well, starts him because of that Submariner delivery. The idea is to completely get the Cubs off guard, and it did. He strikes out a World Series record 13 batters. At that time, the World Series record, 13 batters. He tosses a 3-1 victory. Cubs, he scatters eight hits, and the Cubs win. So that's a big win, a close game, but a big win. The A's blow out the Cubs in Game 2, but the Cubs come back and win Game 3.
You meant that the A's won Game 1.
Yeah, the A's won Game 1, and the A's come back. The A's win Game 2 as well, so they go up 2-0 in the World Series. And the Cubs come back and win Game 3 in Philadelphia. Guy Bush, you talk about other overlooked players. Guy Bush is one, a very consistent hurler in the 1920s and early part of the 1930s for the Cubs, later for the Pirates. He tosses a complete game and wins Game 3. Game 4, an infamous game in World Series history. You know what happened in that game. The Cubs are up 8-0 in Philadelphia at Shibe Park. They're up 8-0. What happens? The A's score a then record 10 runs in the bottom of the 8th. 2 very important errors contribute to this floodgates. And I think, that's really it. The A's win Game 4. Game 5, 2 days later, the A's win again. The World Series is over.
Just a quick side note about the Athletics. After playing in Philadelphia, they moved on to Kansas City, where they just didn't do well. In fact, the A's arrived in Kansas City in 1955 and played there through the 1967 season, and never once did they finish a season at 500 or above. But what few might realize, only the New York Yankees have won more consecutive World Series. Twice, the Athletics won back-to-back World Series while playing in Philadelphia, 1910 and 1911, and they won a third in 4 years in 1913 before losing in the series in 1914. The Athletics won again in 1929 and 1930 before losing in the World Series in 1931. Now, after leaving Kansas City, the A's put together one of the most colorful and successful teams of all time and won 3 straight World Series championships, 1972, 1973, and 1974. Only the Yankees have ever won at least 3 World Series in a row, and of course, they've done that 3 times. how popular a guy was Kai at the time, and how well known throughout the baseball world was he? I mean, did the fans know who Kai was? We talk about today that the Pittsburgh fans and maybe even the Cubs fans don't know a whole lot about Kiki Cuyler, but back in the day, I mean, with all the names that we've been talking about and, you know, the Yankees, Murderers Row Yankees, how popular a guy was Kiki Cuyler back in his day?
Yeah, even today when you walk into Wrigley Field and you see the banners of famous players along the concourse, I would imagine people look at something and say, Kiki, or they probably say Kiki Cuyler. Who could that be? But during his career, I'll venture to say that he was one of the most popular players, not just for the Pirates, but also for the Cubs. At least that's how he was portrayed in contemporary press. Now, there might be many reasons for that. If we think of baseball in the 1920s and 1930s, well, many players were considered uncouth. They were hard-nosed rabble-rousers. We think of maybe the Gas House Gang players for the St. Louis Cardinals. These were rough-and-tumble players. They lived hard. They partied hard. Cuyler was considered one of the game's gentlemen, a very classy individual. Other direct quotes were that he was considered a fashion plate. He was a good-looking player. If you look at images of Cuyler, either in his uniform or in his street clothes, one of the things that immediately draws my attention are his eyes. He had riveting dark eyes, very riveting. Your attention is really drawn to his riveting eyes. He was a good-looking guy. He had dark complexion, dark hair. He wasn't big, maybe about 5'10", 180. He was lithe. He was athletic. He was in shape.
Yeah, he played basketball. He was a dancer. He was a singer. This guy had he was like a complete package.
He was. So he was really. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke. He was really a gentleman's gentleman. And as you just said, he was a Renaissance man in many ways. You're right. He loved to sing. He was a well-known dancer. He even performed in vaudeville in Chicago in 1930. If you look at images, he dressed impeccably, always seen around town. He lived on the north side of Chicago, not far from where where Wrigley Field is, and he was married, had 2 children. You can a cursory search on Google, I'm sure, would even produce some images that he had with his children. Must have been a good-looking guy, but he was not one of these rabble-rousing bachelors who lived the high hard life. You mentioned his sports. He was a novelty at the time insofar as he played sports year-round. Now, maybe year-round training, well, that's even new. That's even something of a novelty in the 1960s, quite honestly, Warren. But Cuyler was he had played basketball in high school and was a fan of basketball. He played in professional and semi-professional basketball leagues, especially in the 1920s and early 1930s, before his injuries really sapped that. And he was a big, he played on basketball barnstorming teams. He was an early advocate of basketball and year-round training. So in many ways, he was very cutting edge.
Let me ask you this. When his playing days were over, and by the way, after the Cubs, he went to the Reds for a couple of seasons, played for the Dodgers, and then when his playing days were over, he wanted to manage a big league club, but he never got the chance. Why? I mean, after reading about him, it appears as if he had what it took to manage, but he never got that opportunity, at least not in the majors. I think he managed a little in the minors, but never got that opportunity in the majors. Why?
Well, he didn't. There are a number of reasons why he might not have. For starters, we could say he was never with the team for such a long time, where he simply moved from that team into a managerial position. So he wasn't with the team for his entire career. His post-career, he simply goes and manages, at that time, a Class D league, a Class D team, or even a Class C team. So that might be one reason. And these are just suggestions that are typically tossed about. Now, when he retired, he did become a manager. Now, he went back to the Southern Association, where he had played, where he had his biggest success. Now, he went to Chattanooga for the Lookouts. He was for 3 years, had some success in the Southern Association. He really enjoyed living down south. Let me add that. So he had no qualms. Now, keep in mind that the Lookouts were a Class A team. This is a step below AA, which was the highest level at that point. You had your two AA leagues, the International League and the American Association, and then, of course, the Pacific Coast League. That's a completely different entity at that time. And so going into a Class A league was, in fact, quite an accomplishment. I'll add that. Keep in mind, there are also only 16 major league teams at this point.
Right.
He moves into a Cubs position as a coach in 1941, 42, 1943. This is during the war years. He's still only in his early 40s at this point, mid-40s. He retires at age 40, his active days. And then he goes back to the Southern Association in 1944 and has 5 very successful years with the Atlanta Crackers. Now, you talk about a name that could not exist today, would be the Atlanta Crackers. A Negro League team was called the Black Crackers. So maybe just another little side digression about that. And he was successful with the Crackers, and he goes to the Red Sox as a coach. And who's his manager with the Red Sox in 49? None other than McCarthy. And Cuyler dies, has a heart attack at the age of 51. He'd retired just 10 or 11 years earlier, has a blood clot in his leg, and that leads to his ultimate death at the age of 1951. So he died early. So it's hard to say, did he have some kind of deficiency, and did that lead to a problem managed, or any kind of poor relationships with other with owners or with front office people? I would say, well, there were a lot of things that simply conspired against them. You know, he playing during the war year, he was with the Cubs during the war years. There's not a lot of change during baseball, at least from the managerial positions. During the war years, of course, there's a lot of change with baseball players and 4F players having to come in to replace literally the hundreds and hundreds of players who served in the military. Would he eventually have become a manager? Why not? Why not? I mean, McCarthy was old. He was suffering the effects of alcoholism in the late 1940s when he took over the Red Sox. Many say that maybe Cuyler was being trained as an understudy for the Red Sox in the 1950s. That's hard to say. There are a lot of different reasons. But again, you know, when you die young like he did, well, it was a little different. I would also say that managers in the 1940s and 50s, and even before so, player managers were pretty common at that time. In the 1950s, player managers become less common, but managers in their 50s and early 60s were quite common.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does.
There's no definitive answer.
No.
I could say that there are a lot of great minor league managers who never got a shot.
Sure.
And were longtime minor league managers. With only 16 major league teams, and really at the time, the American League and the National League were two separate entities, unlike today with the Major League Baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Players and managers, too, they stayed in one league. Trades, 99%, I would venture to say, although I don't have the statistics in front of me, 99% of the trades existed within a league. Rarely were players traded from one league to the other. Think of them really as two separate entities, not like today. There wasn't the movement back and forth. It's not like, oh, well, I can't find a job with the Cubs. Let me go to another league. Now, Cuyler, of course, shows that this isn't a headfast rule because he goes to the American League Red Sox in 1949, but he has a sponsor there, his old manager, Joe McCarthy. Joe McCarthy was very well known as somebody who picked up his former players, who was really one who liked players that played for him, trusted him. And Cuyler had McCarthy's trust.
Interesting. Hey, Gregory, let me ask you this question as well. During your research of Kiki Cuyler, what was the most fascinating thing you learned about him?
I guess I would say a few things. One, his incredible start in 1924 and in 1925. The way the press and scouts compared him in 1924 and 25 and even much of 1926 to players like Joe Jackson, Tris Speaker, and Cobb, and his batting aggressiveness to Hornsby. I find that to be really amazing because I didn't know that before I began my research about him. I find it to be startling what happened in Pittsburgh in 1926 with the ABC affair. I find it unfathomable that a player like Cuyler's, with Cuyler's ability, could be benched for almost 2 months and not played in the World Series, a catalyst in the team.
Especially someone as good as he was. My gosh!
And the way he came back with the Cubs and had these amazing seasons in 29 and 30 and 31. And then he suffers potentially career-threatening injuries in 1932 and in 1933. He breaks a bone in his left foot in 32. He cracks a fibula in 1933. He's 33 and 34 years old. He almost, these are injuries that, and he comes back in 1934, bats .338 at age 35, and again has another fantastic season in 1936 with the Reds. I find this to be, he was the oldest position player in the National League in 1936 with the Reds. And he bats .326. He's 37 years old. 37, mind you, in the 1930s
right.
Might be a lot different than the way it was today. But he was a consummate professional. He stayed in shape. I think those are to me the most fascinating things. Someone else might say, well, he was at least peripherally involved in, this sordid affair with Billy Jurgis and Violet Valley in 1932. Maybe just a word about that. Violet Valley was a showgirl in Chicago, and she shot Billy Jurgis, a young, good-looking guy, because he supposedly broke off this affair with Violet Valley. Maybe not an important story, but it might be a little bit interesting. Anyway, the showgirl, Violet Valley, blames Kiki Cuyler for having shot him.
Huh.
She blames Cuyler that she shot Jurgis because Cuyler told Jurgis he should stop having this sordid affair with the showgirl.
Huh.
So she blames Cuyler for leading her to shoot Jurgis. Now, he wasn't involved at all in the shooting or anything like that, but he's at least involved in her account of the story.
Interesting.
That might be more of a weird, tangential, unimportant baseball story. Jurgis, by the way, came back that season, amazingly enough, and played.
Well, Gregory, I want to thank you so much for taking some time to speak with me on Sports Forgotten Heroes. You are a wealth of knowledge. You've written so much, and I certainly hope you would consider coming back.
Oh, I certainly would, Warren. I think we could communicate at some point. I have a few suggestions of maybe another player that we could discuss in the future. It was awfully fun. I hope I wasn't stuttering around looking for...
No, you're fine.
Looking for ideas and anecdotes and some stories to tell.
Oh, it was great. I really enjoyed it. I love these conversations. We could go on forever, but at some point we have to say, hey, it's time to wrap it up.
I'm telling you, you're right.
So once again, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Good deal. You take care, my friend.
Kai was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame by the Veterans Committee in 1968. For his career, he hit .321 with 128 home runs, 157 triples, 394 doubles, and he crossed the plate 1,305 times. The knock against Cuyler, as Wolf said, was that he played in so few games, only 1,879 in 18 years. But in those games, Kai was as aggressive as they came, and the guy could flat out hit. And the fact that baseball fans in Pittsburgh and Chicago cannot recall Kiki Cuyler is actually pretty amazing. Next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes, we're going to stick with baseball and take a look back at the career of the last man to play for the New York Giants, the Brooklyn Dodgers, and the New York Yankees. A pitcher who was a part of three of the most memorable moments in the history of the game, Sal the Barber Magley. That's next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes. Thanks again to today's guest, Gregory Wolf, and we'll see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday's Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.